Hello, welcome to week 3 of our conflict management and mediation class. This week we're going to talk about goals. Some people refer to them as interests. Some people might call them wants or needs. I'm going to call them goals, and maybe that's because I used to be a soccer player and I love to score goals. And so I have a positive view of goals. So that's what we'll talk about. I am going to bring up the PowerPoint now. Conflict goals. What do people want when they have a conflict? Before we get into that subject matter, I would like you to first think about a conflict. And I want you to write down the key facts of that conflict that you've experienced. This conflict can be from personal life, a work context, the political arena, or any context that you've been in, family, home, work, clubs. It's okay to be any place. I just want you to be very clear on the facts of the conflict because you're going to analyze all the goals. And today we're going to talk about what all those goals are so that you know how to do that. During this time, you can stop the video right now so that you can have some time to think about it. And then periodically, I'm going to ask you to think of specific goals as I talk about them so you know what they are, so that by the end you're going to have several different pieces of analysis, and then you're going to use that for a discussion question for your assignment that's going to be submitted. So please be sure and do this, do a good job so that you can do an awesome job on the discussion question. Okay, see you at the next slide. Wilmot and Hawker talked about 4 types of goals in a conflict. The first is the topic, which is what people typically talk about. The next is the relationship. And then we have the identity or the face. And then we have the process goals. I'm going to talk about each of them individually, starting with the topic. Topic goals are the ones that are often talked about, and they typically refer to some externally objectifiable issue or actual objects that people might be disputing around. What to do, what decisions to make, where to go, how to allocate resources, and who gets what or how much. Here's some examples. People might be arguing over time, money, space, who's driving, who's paying for gas, all those kinds of things. They're usually easiest to identify in a conflict because, like I said, that's what people are talking about. And since that's what they're talking about first, it's also how we often define a conflict. So the negotiation that we did 2 weeks ago was the orange negotiation or the ugly orange negotiation, because that's how we think about it, because we're negotiating over oranges. Thinking about that topic or the conflict that I asked you to talk about, I want you to think about what were the topic goals and what were the topic goals for each of the parties in the dispute, okay? You can stop the video now, and then when you're finished with that, move on. We'll go on to the next goal. The next goal are the relationship goals, which is who are we to each other? How do we want to be treated? How much influence do we want to exert or accept? Do we like other people calling the shots, or do we want to call the shots? Do we want to be independent? That person we're dating, do we want to spend every weekend with them, or do we want to spend some weekends with them and some with our buddies? And how much independence? So if you want to be alone more, spend more time, or even at work, do you like working alone? Do you like working with other people, and so on? These are all relational goals. Some typical relationship goals. This is what you might hear people saying when it's a relationship goal. What I need here is some respect. What I want from you is support in public. You don't have to be nasty about it. I want you to trust me. I thought we were best friends. What I do is none of your business. So these are some things people might say. So think about that conflict, and did you get to the right goals? And then we'll move on to the next goal, the next type of goal. So if you haven't done it yet, write down the relationship goal and then move on to the next slide for our video. Identity and face-saving goals. Who am I? This could be a question of how might my identity be protected or repaired in this situation? So do you feel like that you're being attacked, like you're not a good friend, you're not a good boyfriend or girlfriend, you're an unproductive employee, you are a lazy student? These are how we think people are thinking about us. Those are identity goals, and some people refer to that as face. And when we're in a conflict, we typically want to protect our own face or repair it when people are damaging it by putting us down. And we can also think about how we can protect the other person, because a lot of times people feel like we are somehow putting them down or not acknowledging them. And that may or may not be the case, but that's a perception. So we want to address that as well. Here's some typical ways that people typically want to be seen. So people want to be seen as competent. They want to see it as a good friend or a best friend, that they're reliable, likable, logical, friendly, responsible, enthusiastic, expert, trustworthy, leader, responsible. So I'm sure you could add to this list, but I'm giving you this to just give you some place to start and think about that conflict again. So what was the identity goal, yours and the other person that was in the conflict, or the other two people that in the conflict that you are thinking about? And then when you're done with that, you can restart the video. Some aspects of face saving and face damaging. So when we're in a conflict, we have our own face and the other person's face. And Wilma and Hocker had provided this diagram in the textbook chapter. So here's ourself and here's the other person, and then we can try to save face or we can damage face. So we can try to help save our own face, the self, and we can also try to help the other person's face, or we can damage our own face by putting ourselves down or doing things that would damage our reputation. And then we could also damage the other person's face by putting them down in some ways. So we want to be careful about this, because this is all in the realm of destructive conflict behavior. So we talked about last week about how conflicts can escalate. These are the things that will escalate a conflict. These are the things that will de-escalate, move the conflict into a constructive direction. The last goal that I'm going to talk about is the process goal. And this is, what kind of communication process do we want to use both to resolve this conflict and maybe in an ongoing way in this relationship that we're in? Some typical kinds of process goals. Some people want to talk right away. Some people want to think about it and talk later. Do we want to talk about this conflict face to face? Do we want to talk about it electronically, like I'm talking to you right now? Or do we want to use a phone? Do we want to have controlled ways of communicating? Now, this is more often at work, where people have types of meetings that might have Robert's Rules of Orders or other kinds of processes that are controlled, or just free flowing like conversation. Do we want it to be secret, or do we want a public vote? So again, this is like a workplace situation or organizational situation. Informal or formal? So we're going to have a meeting, or are we just going to chat over coffee? Is it going to be public or private? And then is it leader directed or democratic? So does everyone get a say, or is just the leader going to call the shots? Are we going to have a rational discussion, or is it okay to be emotional? Is it okay if people cry? Is it okay if people scream, if they jump up and down? What's okay? Because sometimes that is the issue, that people don't like the way the other people are dealing with the conflict. Are we going to be quiet or loud? These are style issues and also culturally based types of things. Voting versus consensus. Voting, everyone has a say. Consensus, everyone not only has a say, but everyone actually agrees before you move on. And then, do we want to deal with this fast or slow? So do you like to take your time and think about things, or do you like to do it right now? These are things that can also be being disputed. So think about that conflict again. You can stop the video again and then think about what was the process goal for each of the people in the dispute and write that down. And when you're done, then restart the video and we'll move on to the next topic within our topics here. Some features of TRIP goals. Not all goals emerge in conflicts. You may have noticed this, that you could come up with some of the TRIP goals, but maybe you couldn't come up with all of them when you were trying to identify them. And then some of them can overlap with other ones. So some goals or interests can overlap with other goals in primacy. Now, the primacy, so how important is an issue or a goal, can differ for each of the people in the dispute. So take your typical student unhappy with the grade type of situation, okay? So the student goes to the professor, and for them, the conflict is, the topic is they want a better grade. And that's the most important thing when they're thinking about it. They just want a better grade, okay? And secondarily, they want the professor to take them seriously. And then they also want to be seen as someone who tries. That's their identity. From the professor perspective, the relational aspect is really important, okay? They don't want the student to think that they're just pulling rank and doing and not assigning the grade based on some objective reasons. They also care about the topic, because most professors, at least all the ones that I know, they do want students to get better grades. And then they also have an identity piece in there because they want students to see them as treating them fairly. I mean, they want students, yes, they want students to think that they treat students fairly. So all of those things are operating for each of the parties, but notice how it's different. For the student, the topic is the biggest piece. For the professor, the relationship is the biggest piece, okay? But they both have identity issues, but those are the smaller pieces of the conflict if we take it apart. When there's unrecognized goals, and a lot of times the identity and the relational goals are not getting recognized, then they can't be addressed. And this is a problem when the identity and relationship goals are actually driving the dispute. I once had a professor who gave me a D. Can you believe I had a D once? Yeah, and I was really upset. And I was upset because of the way the teacher talked to us. I felt like he was talking down to us all the time. So because of that fact that I thought that the professor was talking down to us, I actually wanted to drop the class. I went to the professor's office to drop the class. And then he asked me if it was because of the grade. And I said, yes. And he said, okay, why don't we have a conversation first and then you can decide. So we did. And then after he explained everything, I was like, oh, okay, all right. And he said, why don't you stay? So I did stay in the class and I got a B. I wasn't thrilled, but I didn't get a D. But the teacher recognized that the grade was bothering me, and that helped us to move towards solving the dispute. Now, when there's these hidden goals, and you see here, you have the topic is being talked about, but in the on the left-hand side, the relational goal is hidden, and on the right-hand side, the identity goal is hidden. So when those goals are hidden and never talked about, they can't be addressed. I don't know if you've seen the movie My Best Friend's Wedding. It's kind of a silly movie, and the lead actress, Julia Roberts, she is afraid to say that she loves this guy that she used to date. And so now he's getting married, and she's going to lose her opportunity because she can't admit that she loves this guy. It's kind of crazy, but that's an example, extreme example. You don't talk about your goal, it can't be met. Now, how can you save your face and the other person's face in a conflict? Well, I find that if I'm able to try to protect and save the other person's face, that they're more likely to reciprocate. So if I say to somebody, look, I know that you didn't do that on purpose, or I know you were doing your best. If I say those kinds of comments, that will help to relieve some of the tension, and then sometimes they will be more likely to want to acknowledge what's going on for me. So that would be how I would answer this question. You might have some other ways that you know that you could save face, that you could share in the discussion section. It's really important to address all of the goals that are relevant in a conflict, because in a serious dispute, if you only focus on the topic and ignore the other parts, people will rarely feel satisfied. And when parties specialize in different goals and don't get to all of the goals, then the conflict can just continue. The last thing I want to say about goals in terms of defining them is that they can change. So Wilmot and Hocker talked about the different stages that goals can go through. So before you actually sit down and talk to the person about the conflict, or maybe not even have a rational conversation, but blow up, before you have that blow up, or before you have that conversation, you have your perspective goals. So that perspective is before you have that conflict interaction. And you think you know what you want, and you define it and so on. Then when you actually are having the conflict, then you have what's called the transactive goals. So this is what you actually articulate, and they can change from the before to the during. They can change because you're getting more information as you have that conversation. So having some flexibility can be a really good thing, because if you learn things that you didn't realize, you might find alternative solutions or better solutions, or maybe just even shift the solutions a little bit, like keep the ones you had in mind, but alter them a little bit. Because if you want to have a collaborative solution, you want for both parties to feel satisfied by the end. Then you have the retrospective goals, which are the goals that emerge after the conflict. So this is kind of interesting, that sometimes after we've actually resolved the conflict, you realize it wasn't really about the money, okay? It was about respect, or it wasn't about going to that particular restaurant. It was about having your ideas recognized too, and not just doing what the other person wants all the time. So a lot of times when we think back on the conflict, the goals that we thought we had will be shifted. And as time goes on, you'll see that a lot of times, if you think about it, a major conflict that you've had, and you look back in history, you'll see even different ways of looking at the conflict, including how you see what the goals were. So that's kind of interesting how goals change, and that's because we change, and our ideas change, and our priorities change as we go through life. So now I want you to identify the perspective, the transactive, and the retrospective goals for the conflict that you just analyzed. So this might take you a little bit of time. So again, I recommend stopping the video and then turning it back on for the last piece of the video after you finish identifying those pieces. Why should we clarify our goals? Solutions that go unrecognized. Solutions will go unrecognized if you do not know what you want. And only clear goals can be shared. So you not only can't recognize, you can't share them with the other person. And so the less information there is when you talk about a conflict, the less able you are to come up with collaborative solutions. Clear goals can be altered also. So as you get more information, as you share, so you'll notice when you did the ugly orange exercise, you realized after having a conversation that you wanted different parts of the orange. And so you didn't have to outbid that person to get all the oranges. You could actually find a way to work together. So that's a really good example of how the goals can be altered. And changing your goals doesn't make you weak. Some people don't want to change because they think that it makes them weak because they are wishy-washy. Well, it means when you change your goals based on information, it means you're a logical, rational thinker, and you are actually you're constantly engaged in reflection instead of just coming up with something and then sticking rigidly to it and never wanting to change, which some people do that, unfortunately. Clear goals are reached more often than vague goals. Well, imagine that. If you articulate your goals and the other party articulates their goals, or you help them articulate your goals, you're much more likely to reach them. Now, here's one of the problems about goals. We think that we can know the other person's goals, so we have very, very high confidence in how accurately we think we see the other person's goals. But in actuality, our accuracy tends to be very low. We frequently have the wrong idea about what other people's goals are. And that's why having a conversation is so important, and keeping an open mind to hearing what the other person has to say is very, very important. Here's a checklist for effective goals. Address short, medium, and long-range goals. So you might want an immediate solution to something, but you realize that you can have more conversations and figure out other things later on. So you could have short-range, medium, and then longer-range goals as your relationship continues. You want to identify specific behaviors that you want. If you can be specific about what you want, you're much more likely to get it than if you're just vague about it. You want to orient towards the present and the future so that you're thinking about how to prevent conflict from emerging in the future, and also how to do a better job. And you want to recognize interdependence. A lot of times people think they're stronger by being independent, but actually the reason we're having conflict is because we are interdependent. So being able to recognize that is actually a strength, not a weakness. And then finally, recognize that there's an ongoing process with collaborative problem solving. And so you may come up with some ideas and then come up with some more later, because every time you have a conversation, you're exchanging more and more information. So you're putting more knowledge into the pool of information available for you and the other people that you're trying to negotiate with. So in sum, the goals are really important to identify and articulate, to make really, really clear. And I hope that you have gotten a good understanding what they are. If you didn't, then please ask questions. I'm very happy to answer questions. And we are going to use this information for a written assignment on the discussion board. And then we will also have a little quizito, and we will also be using this information in class. So I want you to really know this information really well before we meet, so that you can talk very fluently about goals as we do some in-class activities using goals. See you in class.